Testing 1, 2, 3. Hello, everyone, and welcome to, well, this is just a bit of a quick question and answer and a bit of a betting discussion about the tennis that we have on offer for today. What I might do first of all is, it's nice to see a couple of people have tuned in for this one. If you do have any questions or anything as we go along, as I said on Twitter, this could go for 10 minutes, could go for an hour, it could go for however long we really have some interaction for. So if you do have any questions, feel free to chuck them in the comments and I can pop them up on the screen and have a bit of a chat. But what I thought I might do first is, I know there's probably some people here who just come along to see what the free bet that I've posted was. As you've probably seen over my time on Twitter over the last 7 years, is that I'm not afraid to make a big play at a big price. And I guess something I really want to make sure and make clear is that a lot of the bets that I put up from a staking standpoint go from 0.5 units all the way up to 5 units. It's based on my selections, and unit staking is based on perceived value as opposed to probability of victory. So I guess that's something I just want to keep in mind when I look at and make some plays here, like the one I'm about to pop up on the screen. So this one was sent out a little bit earlier this evening, and it kind of goes against everything that you've seen probably on Twitter from a lot of people over the last 24 hours. And it's just down the bottom of the screen there. So we're going for ATP Dubai, 3 units on Monfils to defeat Novak Djokovic. So look, I'm happy to put my neck out on this one. It's, I think, something that, it's a match that has a lot of, there's a lot of history between these two players. And it's something that, we've seen over the last 24 hours, as I said, that, there's a 17-0 run here for Novak Djokovic. It's nice to see a few people here, and I'll pop some comments up as we go along, that, a few people already had Monfils in their DraftKings team, which is great to see. I know I did just mention the 17-0 in terms of the record and, winning the last 17. King Kyrgios comes up with a good point that obviously Monfils did beat Djokovic in 2004. Obviously, a little bit of water's gone under the bridge there, but what I'll do is have a little bit of a chat through, I guess, of my reasoning for this play. Normally, the bigger plays like this when we're talking, so when I posted it before, it was sitting at $7.25 for Monfils to win here. And it looks like it has actually come in a little bit at a couple of sites, which is good to see that, a few people agree with the reasoning there. And I guess this is, as I said, it's something a little bit different compared to what a lot of people will put up and post up. Normally you'll go with a game handicap here or a total over. I was at the match that these two played in Brisbane last month. So these two played in the ATP Cup, and it was the second match of the tie. So Benoit Paire had actually beat Lajovic in the first rubber. And I actually thought that Monfils was starting to figure things out a little bit with Djokovic across that match. When you look at the score, you just look at Djokovic defeated Monfils 6-3, 6-2. When you dig a little bit deeper, Monfils actually had 9 breakpoint opportunities across 5 different service games with Novak. Conversely, and wasn't able to convert any of those 9. And I think from that early, that pressure really built on Monfils, and it, as each opportunity came and went, it became more of a pressing issue for Monfils. And we know that Djokovic is obviously very good at converting breakpoints himself, and on that particular night was able to convert 3 out of 3. But when you look through the actual points won and points lost, both players lost 24 points on serve for the match. But I guess it's worth noticing that, Monfils lost serve 3 times and Djokovic didn't lose serve for that match. There were just a couple of, it was a real game of fine margins in that first set. There were a couple of times where Monfils was perhaps a little bit casual, and I think there was a 40-30 point in particular that I remember from sitting there where Monfils was just a little bit casual on, I think it was on his backhand in a rally, and sent one long, and after that on a double fault, it just put him under a little bit too much pressure, and Djokovic was able to convert. But I think when you look at such an extended head-to-head record over a long period of time, it's really, a lot of it you can kind of ignore. I think we are all aware, and anyone who's been watching tennis, particularly over the last month, can see that Monfils is in career best form. He's coming off back-to-back titles. This is the first year that he's won more than one title, and a lot of his victories have been in straight sets on that run as well. And I think that's something that's worth acknowledging. Normally, when he gets to this stage of a tournament, in years gone by, he's normally played a couple of long matches and, kind of phased in and out of some matches. But the interesting part with what he's been able to do recently is his ability to be able to stay locked in from start to finish and continue to put that pressure on. It's also probably worth mentioning that obviously Monfils is kind of getting towards the later stages of his career, but he still does have aspirations of actually making it into the top 5. And from my perspective, and on a recent Periscope or podcast that I did, one of the questions was who was the biggest disappointment, I guess, from an ATP and a WTA perspective. And I actually said Monfils because we're seeing over the last 4 weeks, and even a little bit more so over the last year, just what he's capable of when everything clicks. We've seen that a lot, more so over the last couple of weeks, and on this undefeated stretch. And winning form is good form, and there has to be confidence there for Monfils. The other bonus, I guess, is if you think, and this is obviously a little bit subjective from me, but if there were a time to be playing Novak, I would much prefer to be playing Novak before a final. So we've got him in the semi-final here, and at the ATP 500 level. I think it's clear that Novak brings his best level, in terms of tennis and consistency and desire and drive at Grand Slam level, followed by Masters 1000 level, which is understandable. So I think if there were ever a time for him to be able to finish off here, I think this is the chance. Monfils looked really good early against Novak, as I said, at the ATP Cup, and that was off an interrupted preparation. So on that particular night, Monfils actually had to stop his warm-up and come back out to courtside because Lajovic had actually had some issues in terms of trying to finish off that first rubber, and I think he served for the second set, had some match points in a tiebreak, and ended up losing it. And it was up to Monfils to actually come back out and try and settle him down and get him back on task. From that, obviously, so it's not an ideal preparation, but also France was up 1-love, so it gave Monfils the ability to kind of try things a little bit, and he still was pretty solid early. The other thing I guess that's worth mentioning is the match afterwards. So France then played South Africa a couple of days later. Monfils actually pulled out of that match with a wrist injury and was replaced by Gilles Simon. And I think we saw as well, Monfils was struggling a little bit still at the Australian Open. However, was able to still put in a pretty solid effort until he lost to Dominic Thiem. Since then, obviously, he's had a little bit of a rest, and he's refreshed and gone to the indoor European part of the tour, and it has put together the best fortnight of tennis that he's been able to produce in his career, and has now come over to Dubai and beaten Fucsovics, Uchiyama, and Gasquet in straight sets. So in terms of odds and what we're looking at here, Monfils is well and truly a class above anything faced by Djokovic this week. I was a little surprised at the $7 plus, considering the form that Monfils has been able to display. He was pretty casual and laid back in his post-match interview after his win against Gasquet, when someone did mention, the head-to-head record with Djokovic, and he basically said, "Oh, look, that means whatever I've tried in the past hasn't worked." So, he was able to kind of smile about it and just acknowledge it and move on to the, answering the other questions, and, not taking himself too seriously and not being too negative on himself as well. So I guess that's a little bit of a reasoning behind it, as well as the fact that, that the humidity that's going to be in Dubai is pretty similar to Brisbane. So, it's not going to be too hot, but it is going to be humid, in that kind of 60, I think it was in the mid 60s is what's forecast for the night session. So it's something to keep an eye on. But, in terms of what I've seen from Monfils, I think it's continued to go under the radar this week because of how well Djokovic has defeated Yaziri. What do we have? Yaziri, Kohlschreiber, and Khachanov. And, they've probably been some more friendly matchups for Novak. I don't think there's anything that, particularly in the first 2 rounds, that was going to be particularly troubling for him. Khachanov is obviously very streaky and hit and miss. Djokovic, I think, was able to get 60% of his first serves into play, but was winning under 50% behind his second serve, and I think that's what I really want to, I want to see from Monfils tonight to be able to attack that second serve when he has the opportunity, and I think that's going to be a really key part of this. So what I might do is I might just jump into some of the questions that we had, and we might kind of come back around to discussing it again in case anyone pops in a little bit later in a bit of a shortened form. Now, I'd just go through first of all some of the comments from those who are listening along, and thanks for listening. Obviously, it's Friday night here in Australia, but wherever you are listening from, it's nice to kind of get on and have a chat just about anything tennis related. So we had a question here from Dex Ryan. I think it may have been a bit of an autocorrect here. I'm assuming you talk about Ash Barty there in terms of can she go all the way. She did well to respond to losing that second set to Muguruza today, and that first and third set were incredibly one-sided. You put her in the box seat. I think at the moment she should be able to take control here, and this actually does tie in with one of the other questions that I received earlier this afternoon on Twitter, which was from Jace, who had the question, after 4 straight wins, has Ash Barty figured out Petra? And, I think you could say that. I think that first set at the Australian Open where Ash was really under the pump, needing to save break points in a number of key spots, and to be able to come out of that, when she wasn't playing her best, it was probably a mark of how well Ash does have Petra's measure. I think when you ask anyone on the tour or anyone who watches tennis, you notice that it is very rare that Ash Barty will lose to the same player twice in a row. She learns from her mistakes, and the fact that she has variety in her game means that she can actually implement something new the next time. And sometimes there might be a trial and error component to it, but she is one of the most tactically sound players on the women's tour. I'll probably put her up there with Simona Halep in terms of her combination with Cahill as some of the more tactically sound players, at the top of the game. I think, if we have a look, so she's due to face Petra. The other, if we just have a quick look, I'll just pull that one up on my screen here. Sabalenka versus Kuznetsova is a really interesting, I guess, clash of styles. At the start of the week, I was very keen on the price of Sabalenka. As it started to get a bit windy with the forecast, I kind of softened a little bit on her, but she did really well to get past Zheng, as well as I think she came back from a bit of a tricky situation to get someone else as well. It was it was Kontaveit, and obviously had that dominant win over Sakkari, and that's probably the best performance we've seen from her, at least this year, if not from since mid to late last year. Sabalenka seems to be more comfortable with Tursunov, by courtside and part of her team. I think Kuznetsova has certainly surprised this week, and she played really well again against Bencic. It's a really interesting clash of styles there, and it isn't a match that I've had a particular play on because I'm more intrigued just to watch it as a fan as opposed to making a selection. But I think if you look at all those matchups, I think you'd have to side with Barty to go all the way there. If we go through, I'm just pulling up some of the comments here. There was one I think here from regarding the play on Monfils. I know that was obviously a comment there. It's a tricky thing, and it is obviously one of the most difficult things in tennis at the moment. in those situations and being asked those questions, I mean, I can only imagine what it's like to be asked, someone's beaten you 16 times in a row or 17 times in a row. What are you going to do about it? You're not going to give away what your tactics are. But, it's probably Monfils' way of trying to take pressure off himself a little bit. And, I think if there was ever a time that Monfils is going to be able to do it, I think this is it. And when you look through the head-to-head and you look at the most recent matches, so you look at the ATP Cup and lack of conversion of opportunities, you look at the Australian Open a couple of years ago when he was right in the match, but I think that day it was 44 degrees or it was scorching hot and both players were physically suffering. I think he's certainly building. If he was quite consistent in terms of his performances and he was just getting absolutely wiped off the court, then I would not be inclined to go down this path today. But I think the fact that you've got it at an ATP 500 level, we're in a semi-final, Monfils is in form, and at the same time going under the radar this week. I think there's enough there to consider the fact that you're getting over $7 here on a head-to-head. And considering all those factors, it's something that I found to be appealing here. Another couple of comments I think we had in here. We've got Dan Evans at the line versus Tsitsipas seems okay. The bloke just never goes away easily. I think Evans was a couple of match points down against Herbert the other day, and came out of that. And you could see how much it meant to him with his celebration afterwards, coupled with the Herbert racket smash. And then could respond there and did a fantastic job against Andrei Rublev in the quarterfinal. And I think he kind of exploited Rublev a little bit as not having a plan B. I think that backhand slice, Evans does have one of the best backhand slices in the game, and his ability to hit that with depth, and force Rublev to generate a lot of his own pace was a bit of the Russians' undoing at times there. And some of the points that Evans was able to construct during that tiebreak in particular were really impressive. I've been a fan of Evans for quite some time, and it's nice to see for him everything clicking. I think you can see mentally he does kind of stay on the edge a little bit with his game. And I just wonder if looking at Tsitsipas and his struggles, I guess, with big servers who have caused him grief in the past. Whilst Evans isn't a big server, he does have that slice, and he's able to put himself into a position where he really limits his unforced errors, and that will force Tsitsipas to have to attack. I don't think Tsitsipas was great against Struff. Obviously, I was on Struff, and it was disappointing that he couldn't go on from that first set win. But I think there is an element of vulnerability here for Tsitsipas. But it will certainly be an interesting match, and I think it shows here there aren't too many matches on overnight, but what we have, there are a number of quality matches here and some interesting contrasting styles as well. Now, if we go back to some questions from earlier. Now, I don't know if King Kyrgios is in here, but on Twitter earlier, I did put the call out for questions, and I wasn't overly specific about what questions you could put. And King Kyrgios decided to pop in the fact that he would love to know how scientists develop seedless watermelon. So you are in luck, because I've actually done a little bit of research this afternoon. I'll keep it short, but apparently in terms of, obviously we know that watermelons are much easier to eat without seeds there. They aren't actually genetically modified, but it's actually in the way that they set up the seeds, and in terms of, I think it's the maturation of the seeds themselves. So what they need to do is set up a diploid plant, which has 2 sets of chromosomes, next to a tetraploid plant, which has 4 sets of chromosomes, which will result in a triplod seed, which has 3 sets of chromosomes, which, as a result, gives you a seedless watermelon. Can't believe I ever thought I'd be talking about seedless watermelons on a stream, but there you are, King Kyrgios. If you want more information, I can send you a link, but we might leave it at that, I think, for now. One of the other questions I think we had from earlier does actually tie in with the play that I had. So that was from Establish the Fun on Twitter, who had the question about over 21.5 games for the Joker Monfils match. Again, in terms of my play and for those who have just tuned in, I'll pop it down the bottom of the screen there, that it is just on Monfils head-to-head against Djokovic in this match. I have a preference to go with the largest selection of the head-to-head. I think when you're playing the percentages of how often you think something will occur, I think, the Monfils, winning more than 1 in 7. When you're comparing it to that total of 21.5, which is a tricky total, you're probably going to need a 7-5 or at least a set 1. I think there's other ways you can play this match if you have a preference of going with Monfils. I think it's probably either going to be Monfils to really push and win here, or it's going to be, a scoreline that will probably drop below that 21.5 total. I see more value in taking that bigger price, from a percentage and a value standpoint, in my opinion. And I would, I guess, looking at that, you could potentially say, and looking at the odds, that maybe Monfils to win a set or Monfils first set winner might be a slightly better value play than the over 21.5. I guess also the other option is to have a little bit of a look and see how things are going early on in the match and make a play live. We might be able to see a bit of value there. That obviously it's a little bit tricky for me because the match will be on at 2 a.m, but I will be doing my best to get up and watch it and be a part of it. But that's kind of my thoughts on it. That, in terms of how often I think that will occur, I think I'd rather be taking Monfils at a big price, because he is obviously, and when you look over the longer sample size, he is a little bit more unreliable at times, and it might be a case of, I think I'd particularly rather take Monfils at the $7 than at the +5 here. I think that's the smarter play long term. Might not come off tonight, but that's the nature of things. We're here for the long game. We're not here for the quick hit and run. And I guess that's kind of how I see things here. And I guess there's a couple of comments here. That is the case. You can never tell which Monfils is going to turn up. I guess he has turned up more often than not over the last couple of weeks, and hopefully he can continue that on. Nice to see King Kyrgios was listening. Love a bit of watermelon chat on the feed while we're talking about tennis, and I certainly don't know anything. That was just reading off a bit of research that I'd done earlier in the afternoon when that question came through, and I'm sorry that you may not have been expecting it, but you know what? We can put a bit of anything into this. Let's have a bit of freedom and have a bit of fun with it and see what happens. I think we had one more question potentially that came up on Twitter, and it was from Huffy. I've popped it down the bottom there. There's been a couple of players recently that have been undervalued by bookies, I guess, over the last 12 months. And, Huffy's mentioned Rybakina and Kudermetova. I think the other one you mentioned was Alexandrova, but I'm only allowed 120 characters in the ticker screen there at the bottom, so had to cut her name out. I think it's obviously something that's easier to look at in hindsight, and in hindsight they have been undervalued just off the basis of how well they've been winning. I've made the comment a couple of times over the last couple of streams and podcasts that there are a couple of players at the moment, due to their performances over the last 12 months, I think that now look like in their odds that that they're just not going to be value for a while. One of those was Rybakina, and you've seen probably me go against her a couple of times to my resulting in losses for me. This is a question that's been asked a lot: is when is Rybakina going to run out of gas? She pulled the pin before playing Barty, which was probably a smart move considering how one-sided their match was at the Australian Open and how much tennis Rybakina has played to start the year. Rybakina is going to continue to rise up the rankings because she was playing lower-level tournaments, this time last year and was really starting to build. So you're going to see her name continue to rise. I think. And thinking about her kind of comparison on the men's side of the draw is probably Medvedev at the moment. I think you're probably not going to see a lot of value in particular matches for them. And another one probably that we do see from time to time is is Nick Kyrgios. He's never really going to be value unless you get him at a big price against one of the top names. He was around $1.40 against Humber yesterday, having not played since January, and it was nearly a play for me, but you just don't quite know what's going to come with Nick. And I guess when you want to be playing that percentages game, you'd rather be having him at a big price. So say hi to Sharks and Sports. It was a great question from Darius there, and thank you for everyone who has popped in their questions here. For those who've popped in, I actually think that Barty should be too good for Kvitova. She has got the edge in this particular matchup, and she has started to figure it out. I think looking at this, and another question here, that Kvitova should be serving more aces, and I think Barty has shown the last couple of times playing against Kvitova that she is looking to try and hit her spots a little bit more with her serving. So that is probably one to consider. But again, I personally, I haven't looked at the odds for that, and I guess with anything, you don't want to be taking a short price compared to what you perceive your probability of that bet getting up. So I think everything has its own price that you probably jump in and get involved. But I guess thinking about as we're saying about Rybakina running out of gas, or those players over the last 12 months, I actually, as I said, Huffy did mention Alexandrova, and I actually wrote about her a couple of years ago, and I thought that herself and Nina Stojanovic were going to come on in 2018, and it just didn't quite click for them. And a couple of years previous to that, Sakkari, and there's a couple of those players that kind of make that transition up from the ITF level kind of in that late season, and they kind of get some opportunities around the Asian swing later in the year. And then you look at them and you see them improve, and you think that they're going to take that next step, and they perhaps don't quite get there. One to keep an eye on who's just won another tournament down at the lower level is Kostyuk from Ukraine. You probably know her from a couple of years ago when she made the third or the fourth round at the Australian Open, and lost to Svitolina there when she was 15 years old. She's one to keep an eye on. She kind of rose up the ranks a little bit and then struggled with injuries and struggled, I think, a little bit with expectation. So she's probably one that I would be keeping an eye on. But yeah, it is tricky because you can, hindsight is a wonderful thing to be able to, go back and say, well, they have been value. But that there are a number of players at the moment, I think, who have been probably a touch overvalued in the markets. Another question that's come through is, how will the tennis community, not the general public, view Sharapova in 5 years' time and her legacy? Good question. Being very careful, I guess, with what I'm saying about this is obviously, for those who haven't, who've been living under a rock for the last couple of days, obviously Maria Sharapova has decided to retire from tennis. Some might say that she retired a couple of years ago because she hasn't really turned up since she came back from a drug ban. There's been a little bit in the news, and obviously everyone has their opinion. I think, having thought about it over the last couple of days as well, you can't deny what she was able to achieve at a young age and when she first burst onto the scene. I think she's an example of potentially a career that, she won five majors. She won one of every Grand Slam, and 2 at Roland Garros. She was the world number 1. She won a silver medal at the Olympics. She did all that, and she probably underachieved. And I think part of that is the injuries that she suffered quite consistently, and she just couldn't really develop any rhythm. The other thing is probably you put Sharapova, put her career 10 years later, and she probably would have been far more dominant. Just, it's unfortunate that she peaked when Serena was still peaking. I think she kind of falls into that same category as, you think of players that, I guess when I think about the men's and the women's over the last 20 years, you think about players who have played exceptional tennis for an exceptionally long period of time and haven't been rewarded. There's probably more on the men's side because of, obviously the big three at the moment. And you think of like the Thomas Berdych, David Ferrer, those players who you'd kind of put in the category of best players to never win a slam. I think, Sharapova could have done more, but she was obviously, that the issues that stemmed from injuries, and particularly shoulder injuries in tennis, are always going to be nasty and they're always going to linger, and it is hard to get over. I think she is a perfect example of that, and just a comment that's come up just while I'm talking about it is, I'm guess seeing what Andreescu's kind of gone through. She is off injured at the moment. I think she injured herself at the end of year championships. I think she was playing Svitolina in the semi-final and hurt herself, and we haven't seen her this year. And I just hope that she can actually get everything clicking with her body, because we've seen what she can do when she's at her best. She won Indian Wells, she won the US Open, she can beat pretty much anyone on her day. And I just worry, I guess, for her as well, that she might be going down that similar path. With tennis how it is today, that it's so important to be able to look after your body, and that longevity in terms of your career is so important. I think Sharapova got injured at some really unfortunate times. She then seemed to just find her form again, and then obviously the drug ban came. 2 years down to 15 months. She was just never really the same after that. And I think, when you look at what she's doing with her life and how she's managing things, and I think with that ban and that time away from the tour, I think her priorities shifted quite a bit. And I think with that, I think her drive to be successful probably wasn't what it was early on, when, that kind of 17 to 22 year kind of category where, she was ruthless. And, you think about it, you look at the controversy around the grunting, and, I've made comments over the years about it as well. There's comments, and you ask most players in the top 20, 30, 40 what their thoughts are of Sharapova, and she wasn't particularly well liked by a lot of people. I don't think that should be held against her when you're talking about kind of legacy or how how we're going to see her. I think this week some people probably went a little bit over the top in terms of their praise of everything, and I think there is a big asterisk next to everything because of what happened from a drug ban standpoint. I found it a little bit weird that Nike came out with such a big banner and retirement, and I think they put it up in Times Square and a couple of places, and it's great to kind of talk about and talk up all the positives and everything she did. Like I rattled off before, she's done almost everything in the game, but there is that big asterisk and question mark that comes with it just because of the ban. I think that will hang around. We've seen other issues with the use of meldonium, and the issues that have caused the Russian Olympic team, and amongst others. It's a big issue, and I know that it was something that was legal for 10 years of her career, but when you've got so many people in your team, and you should be so on top of things in terms of what changes from a what's considered legal from a sporting standpoint. So I think she did a lot. She could have done a lot more, but I think she was a victim of circumstance, but then also her own mistakes, I think, cost her. And at the end of the day, I just don't think that drive was there the last couple of years. And I was pretty strong in December, and I've been strong. Even looking back to last month, I think she stole wildcards in Brisbane and at the Australian Open. I don't think this is a decision that she's made, just in the last week or two. I think this is something that's been a really, I think it's been coming for a while, and it was disappointing to see her turn up to Brisbane and lose in the first round, and turn up to Melbourne and lose in the first round. I just didn't think it was, I just thought that was poor, and it probably wasn't the best way to finish. Another question here is Andy Murray back soon or not? I believe it's going to be a little bit touch and go. He may need another surgery, so I think part of his other surgery has caused a little bit of extra. It's basically been a little bit of extra bone growing on his pelvis, which is causing some discomfort and some issues. There's two ways I can kind of go about it. The first is he can kind of go through a training block and try and work through it and continue on with the season and probably playing discomfort, which I think he probably doesn't want to do. He's been playing in pain his whole life, and he's just been, he's just had that patch and period to be able to play and be quite pain-free. The other option is to have surgery, and if he were to have another surgery again, you'd start to wonder whether that maybe be it for Andy. It would definitely rule him out of Wimbledon, which I think would be a big blow for him, particularly after he missed it last year. But he might be back, but I don't think it's, I think he's just one to watch, I think, for the next little while. Another question here from Huffy around Leylah Fernandez. Obviously, Leylah's through to the semi-finals in Acapulco this week. It's been a bit of a surprise kind of week for a couple of players there. And I guess what her strengths are. She's obviously very young, and she's got a lot of time ahead of her. As a lefty as well. I think she does have a little bit of variety, and I think she's obviously been fantastic this week. She's ultra consistent for her age. I think you look at a lot of the teenagers, they can really be quite dramatic week to week in terms of what they produce. She's definitely one to watch. She's probably a little bit limited at the moment in terms of her size and strength, and can be hit off the court at times by some of the stronger players. But that being said, that she does really do a fantastic job of forcing opponents to hit winners a lot of the time. Potapova kind of had spurts and runs today, but just couldn't put it together. I think Potapova was up 2-love in that first set, and Fernandez was able to steady the ship and take control pretty quickly. So she is certainly one to watch, and a lot of people don't like it when a lot of the seeds go out early in a lot of these tournaments. I think it's a fantastic opportunity for a number of people. You look at Thailand a couple of weeks ago, and you look at Acapulco this week. You look at the players that have made the semi-final in Acapulco compared to Doha, and it's just a lot of opportunities there. I think she's going to be. She's not going to be in the top 20, 30, 40, I don't think, this year, but she will continue to steadily progress, and they're the ones you probably want to keep an eye on more so, that if she can look after her body and not overdo it at her age. I think that's the thing to be really careful of, is to not try and capitalize too much too early. And we need to keep in mind that we've got these players here who will be playing for a long period of time. They need to look after their bodies, because if something, yes, they do win a lot of money if they win tournaments and all of that, but also like King Kyrgios said here about Andreescu, they could also be very easily out of the game before they know it, due to injury or being able to not being able to look after themselves. So they need to make hay while the sun shines, but they also need to look after themselves. And I think she's certainly one to watch. But she's probably still a little ways off that top kind of 30, 40, 50 at the moment. I do think the ceiling for Fernandez, I think it is quite high, but I think she's still a ways off, and she's still developing parts of her game. Another comment from King Kyrgios, and I agree about Olga. I think she will kick on this season. Saw her a little bit. I think it was at the Australian Open qualifying, and I think it's not completely there, but I think she's certainly heading in the right direction, and is one to watch for this year. Now, I don't think we have any more questions. So unless anyone has anything that they want to ask before we wrap up, I'll just kind of come back around. If anyone's tuned in late, we've got obviously the free selection for tonight was 3 units on Monfils to defeat Djokovic. Yes, I know I'm a little bit different to most people. Yes, I'm happy to put my head out, my neck out. And yes, if Monfils loses 6-love, I will still get up in the morning. The sun's still going to come up, and I'm still going to feel exactly the same. I'm happy with the price. I'm happy to play it in these circumstances. And if there is anyone who's watching who wants a copy of the written preview that I've sent out, just send me a message on Twitter, and I can send this one through as the free play. I think it'll be an interesting match, and hopefully Monfils doesn't make me look too silly, but at the same time, I can I'm happy to put my neck out before a match and take these big prices and see what happens. I know that if he does lose, that there will probably be a little bit come my way, but you know what? That's life. I'm happy to do that. If I have a look, and there is a perfect example, as you said, King Kyrgios, of how quickly things can disappear. With a really, really bad wrist injury that's needed a lot of surgeries for Anna. Now, if I have a little bit of a look, I think the last question, any DraftKings lineup picks. I mean, if you want to be a little bit, not dramatic, but if you want to kind of put your neck out a little bit, obviously, if I'm putting fees to win, I guess he's probably someone who would free up a bit of salary for you to make some other selections for today. I don't generally get as involved later in the week for DraftKings for a couple of reasons. It's just not as many options. If you look at if you're not going, you basically need to find that underdog there somewhere just because of the way the prices are set up. Just having a look now, and this is another one that I'll probably be playing tomorrow as something to keep an eye on. Sorry, just like cough into the microphone. Is Wild against Garin. I think if you look at his price, I'm just got it up now, is 4,800. I think that's one to keep an eye on. He was struggling with a back issue today, and I had ADF to beat him, and obviously just didn't get over the line in that third set tiebreak. After bageling him in that second set, he's probably one to keep an eye on. I guess if you took one of Wild or Monfils, that probably frees up a fair bit of your salary, considering you're not going to be taking one of Djokovic or Garin. I think Hugo Dellion's a good one. Casper Ruud. Let me just kind of put a little bit of a team together on the fly. So it's to say we've got Monfils, Dalian, Ruud, Barty, and then that would leave, you pretty much got a pick of anyone you like for the last two spots there. But yeah, as I said, you don't really have that many options, and that's what makes things a little bit tricky here. I guess the advantage, there's some pros and cons, I guess, with how DraftKings is kind of set at the moment from a tennis perspective. I think, when you look at, they need to come up with a way of managing when players pull out. That you can't just, and you look almost every day. There's an example when you go onto when you go and have a look on Twitter at people trying to contact like the assist line, that that they've picked a player, they're withdrawn, and you get zero. And there's kind of no way around that. At least if you get a player that's playing someone that's pulled out, you still get some points. And early in the week, it's worth keeping an eye on to see if you get any players that you think might be withdrawing and taking the opponents at a lower salary to try and get them into your team and to try and boost points. But I think there's still probably, I'm not saying there's teething issues because it has been around for a while, but there are some things about it that probably aren't as smooth. That being said, that does, I guess, kind of stop people from putting an exceptional amount of entries in, because they don't want to play around players that potentially will score zero. So I think that's also something to, that there's some pros and cons with it at the moment, but at the moment personally, I'm just kind of picking single teams or one or two teams and just trying to do not so much trial and error, but just kind of keeping an eye on things and seeing what the winning selections and winning teams come up with and what they can produce. But yeah, basically, as you've said here, if you have a player withdraw, you're as good as done. you're not going to be getting much more than, at the absolute best, probably your money back or just a little bit more. Now, I think we might leave it there if we don't have any more questions. Thanks for tuning in. Obviously, just over 45 minutes of me rambling about tennis one way or another. Looking to do this, obviously, as I said, a little bit more where we can, and it gives a little bit of a different outlet to kind of talk about things. I guess, opening up, and from my perspective, still trying to find the balance a little bit with obviously what I can provide and talk about on a scope, and then making sure that those who subscribe are still getting value for money. There is obviously consideration maybe down the track of looking at trying to get everything to just be out there for free, and just to kind of launch into everything through scopes and podcasts and everything, and see what people like and dislike, and work from there. And that might be something that does happen down the track, but at the moment it's still a little bit of a balancing act. But it's obviously something new, and having done 7 years of typing all this stuff out, it's nice to kind of sit and chat and kind of go through things in a little bit of a different way to what I've been able to do in the past. So thanks for those who have been listening. Thanks for those who have interacted, and hopefully we can figure out some ways to do this more and more over the course of this year, and looking forward, because I think there are a lot of different things that you can talk about, be it just pure tennis. I obviously have that interest in talking a little bit more about the Australian tennis players as well. You can, and having discussions with some people, looking at potentially getting some early Grand Slam kind of live discussions up with the scoreboards on Flash Score or something up on the screen, and kind of talking through what's going on. There's a lot of scope to be able to do a lot of things here. Obviously it's 10:30 now, so I might head off for a little bit, and potentially maybe jump on a little bit later if I am up at 2 a.m. for the Monfils Djokovic match, and see how we go, or if there's any interest in that. One other question that's quickly come in. So, thoughts on the Davis Cup withdrawals. So obviously, for those who haven't heard the news, Nick Kyrgios and Alex de Minaur have pulled out. I'm not entirely surprised. Obviously, Kyrgios is still injured. We've got de Minaur, who said he's aggravated his abdominal injury when he played Kekmanovic the other day. It was a really tough ask for these players to go from Mexico to Adelaide and then back to Indian Wells. I know that there is a little bit of time off in that week build up, but it's not suitable for these players. It's a great opportunity for, I think we've got Millman, Thompson, Duckworth, Piers, and Bolt. It's a great opportunity for those guys, and a lot of them didn't get many opportunities through the ATP Cup, because they did go to de Minaur and they did go to Kyrgios in the doubles late as well. But not surprised. It's a great opportunity for those guys. Bolt in particular, being from South Australia, playing at home. Yeah, it'll be interesting. They should still win. You'd hope they'd still win against Brazil, but it'll be a fascinating week. But keeping in mind and having a look at those players, it's going to be a quick turnaround for them to get back and play. You've got the Indian Wells Miami little period coming up. So what we might do is we might leave it there. As I said, it's just after 10:30, and what I will. I think we had one question earlier from Sharks and Sports about a whiskey selection for the week. We might bring that into the equation a little bit later. I don't have one on hand yet. It's probably about 5 to 10 minutes away. So what I will do for you, good sir, is I will send you a little bit of an update of what's on offer when I jump off here and go and pour myself a drink. Alrighty, we might leave it there. Thanks again for everyone who has joined in. This does stream on Periscope, so that obviously comes through Twitter. I've also set up a YouTube channel as well to be able to watch things back. It's a little bit easier because I know a lot of people don't have Periscope downloaded and things can kind of get lost in the feed. So if you subscribe there, all these videos automatically translate over to YouTube. So if you want to go back and catch anything, then you know what we will do. I'll do my best to try and get things up here as regularly as possible. I think there's a lot of interest there. Looking at people talking and discussing things about tennis particularly on Twitter, but across social media. There is kind of still a little bit of a disconnect between kind of the media that probably covers tennis just for the tennis purist and those who probably are looking for things for trying to find an edge, maybe from a betting perspective or whatever it may be. And hopefully we can try and fill that gap in a little bit and try and find a little gap there where people are happy to get involved and have a bit of a watch and look. So just for those who have just quickly popped in at the end, the play that was the free play, it's just scrolling along the bottom of the screen there. So it's 3 units on Monfils to defeat Djokovic. Got it at $7.25. As I said a couple of times, you probably, it's not a play you'll see very far across. You won't see it much across Twitter. I'm happy to put my neck out and take the bigger prices. It's not something that I think it's something if you look at what I've done over the last couple of years, I'm always happy to take those bigger prices and see what comes. It all comes down to having your staking and your bankroll and everything in check. This isn't a play if you're just going to come in and pick one play and then run away. That's not the play. It's looking over that long game, and as we've seen even over the first 2 months of the year, I think early on in January there was a rough patch there through Brisbane, and we were down about, I think it was 20 in the 20s of units, and to then go from a minus 10 unit day on the first day of the Australian Open, and to come back then and end up plus 50 units over the following 3 weeks. I think it was. There will be swings and roundabouts, and that happens when you take these big prices. You're not going to, it's just part of the game, and I guess dealing with variance and dealing with close losses. So looking at an example, I had ADF to defeat Garin today. I think it was 2.5 units at $3.25. You're looking at those kind of 7-8 unit swings pretty regularly. It's part of the game. I'm happy to play that part of the game. I'm happy to put my neck out and put those plays out there. At the end of the day, another example of a big play from earlier this year was Putintseva to defeat Collins in Brisbane. It was 4 units at, I think it was 4 units at $1.90 that I thought was value. She won one game, but you know what? You learn more from those losses than you do from wins. And in that instance, was able to get Putintseva at almost double the odds at the Australian Open a couple of weeks later, and end up profiting almost 4 units from that particular match. So you know what? You always learn something. There's always something to be found, and those losing stretches, if you look at them the right way and you acknowledge what you've seen and can put into practice for the next time, then you're going to benefit and things are going to improve. But the worst thing you can do is just say, well, I was hard done by today, and that that's that. That will be the case sometimes, but it won't be the case all the time. And if you can find your spots and find your learning opportunities, put them into practice. You look at a lot of these players; they will play each other a couple of times in a year. Give yourself an opportunity to improve and go, you know what, I didn't win this time, but next time, I think there's an opportunity here to make a play. Well, we might finish up there. As I said, I thought we were going to finish up at the 45-minute mark. We've got another 10 minutes, but thanks everyone for tuning in. If you have any questions, just I'll be on Twitter for the next little while. Otherwise, I'm contactable on email, so ace@acetennispreviews.com. Or if you just leave a comment on Twitter or in the YouTube channel. We've also got Instagram and Facebook. Everything's kind of expanding, and we're we'll see what happens with those as well. But they're probably the main things at the moment is via Twitter or via the email. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time.